Welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered, the go-to podcast for anything and everything retail crime related. I'm your host, Professor Emmeline Taylor. So I'm going to start today's episode by telling you a parable, which is how all good podcast episodes should start, absolutely. And for the parable purists out there who might recognise this, I hold my hands up. I have adapted it somewhat to suit my needs, but also to match my storytelling inabilities. So bear with me. So there's a group of people walking down the street. And somebody excitedly approaches them and says, "Hey, do you want to be part of a competition?" And they say, "Yeah, okay, why not?" So the person guides them over to a large building. And inside, in a darkened room, he's got an elephant. Don't ask me why. And he says to the group of people, "Okay, I'm going to give you 3 seconds each to go into this room, have a feel about, and if any of you can correctly identify what's inside it, I'll give you $20. Okay, fine. So the first person goes in, and in their 3 seconds, they feel the elephant's long trunk. "Easy, it's a snake," they declare. Nope, that's incorrect. So the second person goes in and feels one of the elephant's big round legs. I think it might be some sort of tree trunk. Nope, incorrect. So the third person goes in and feels one of its sharp, long tusks. And he decides it must be some sort of weapon, and his guess is that it's a spear. Nope, again, that is incorrect. And then the fourth person goes in and feels a breeze from the elephant flapping one of its large ears. I think it must be some kind of fan, perhaps. No, completely wrong. And so the person running the competition reveals that it is, in fact, this large elephant. And the 4 people walk away and they discuss their different experiences of what they felt in the room. And they laugh to themselves about how wrong they had been. Now let's substitute that elephant for organised retail crime. And I think we have some of the same issues. There's lots of subjective experiences. There's lots of people grasping in the dark for answers. And I think really we need to be able to come together and discuss the different understandings, the different experiences of what ORC looks and feels like in our retail stores. Now, that's going to be the focus of today's episode. I have 3 fantastic guests today. So I'll be joined by Superintendent Patrick Holdaway from the National Business Crime Centre in the UK. Gus Downing, editor of D&D Daily, will be joining me from Ohio. And Corin, Dennison, who's Global Director, Profit Protection at Adidas. A very interesting and insightful lineup. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Now, one of the key things that I am going to discuss is around definitions. And it's interesting, actually, that there doesn't seem to be any universal working sort of concept of what ORC actually entails. And that means that anything really can be badged as ORC. So one person who is manipulating the self-service checkout on a regular basis is organised, it's retail, it's crime. Is that ORC? Or does it need to be scaled up? So have multiple people working in multiple different roles, somebody stealing, somebody distributing, somebody selling on. There's lots of different factors I think we need to tease out. And just in recent weeks, I'm beginning to see almost a step away from using the term organised retail crime to using other language such as bulk theft or organised looting. And it's almost as if ORC became such an overused catch-all buzzword that it almost became meaningless in some ways, because people within that framing were talking about such different things. So we almost need to have more precision to understand, is this prolific offenders, persistent offenders? Is there a scale that needs to be achieved in order for this to be ORC? Does it need to be travelling offenders or multi-site? There's lots of different ways, I think, that we can begin to typologize different offending behaviours. And once we have that clarity, I think it immediately becomes clearer what the right response should be to each different category of offender. So let's go to our first guest now, Superintendent Patrick Holdaway, who heads up the National Business Crime Centre. He's been in that post for about 5 years now, and I think most people in this country working within the business crime space will be more than familiar with Patrick and his team's work. Patrick's one of those people who has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things crime, so I'll be certainly testing him on some of those things today. Patrick, welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered.
Thank you very much, Emmeline.
So let's start with what are the trends that we're seeing at the moment? There's lots of, I'm seeing loads of news reports, there's lots of activity. But for you as the police, as the National Business Crime Centre, what are the key trends we're seeing in terms of retail crime?
So you're right. I think there has been a change since I've been doing the role. We obviously had COVID in between, which obviously changed the focus. Retailers became a bit of an enforcement agency, certainly around kind of face masks. I think what we're seeing recently is that there's more kind of large-scale shop theft. Shoplifters coming with bags and kind of clearing shelves, targeting particular items. Violence against shop workers is still a big concern for many retailers and something that police treat very, very seriously. And there's also the issue of organised crime groups as well. And of course, police in their work are becoming more aware of their involvement in the retail crime sphere.
Yeah, definitely. So we're certainly hearing a lot about organised retail crime. But what I see in the newspapers or on the radio quite often is that this is due to the cost of living crisis. Now, is that actually a bit of a red herring? Is this organised criminal gangs that are targeting retail? What's happening?
I think they've always been an area of interest for shoplifters because it's a necessity for certain groups of people. If you've got a young baby, they need to feed it. It's expensive. And there'll always be a bit of a tension around those kind of areas. But I think it's a bit of a mixture. But we are definitely seeing some increases around that kind of cost of living increase.
Okay. So let's talk about the more organised criminals then. And there seems to be lots of different descriptions. So everybody's talking about, ORC, but it seems to mean different things to different people. Is there an official definition that we can look to?
So there are a number of definitions. The one that the police are very much working towards, which is that kind of serious and organised acquisitive crime definition, looks at individuals planning, coordinating and committing serious offences that involve property, whether individually or in groups or part of a national or international network where material gain is derived. So it's very much about groups working together, being clearly very organised. And I think we are looking at serious offences. Now, that may be serious in terms of volume of offences, in terms of value, or actually if there's a threat, harm and risk around kind of violence aimed at people as well. So that's kind of the area we're looking at. There are various different definitions. You've got the Serious Crime Act definition, and the CPS have got an organised crime strategy definition as well. But certainly the serious and organised acquisitive crime definition is one that we're very much working towards in policing.
Okay, so there are some definitions out there that we can look to. Because I think, for me, one of the concerns is that when we're not all talking about the same thing, it's very easy to then sort of water down the seriousness. So if I'm talking about somebody being an organised retail criminal who's just stealing for their own purposes, but at volume, perhaps, that could water down the definition when we're then looking at large gangs that are travelling the country, that are stealing in bulk, selling online. That's quite a different proposition, isn't it?
It is. But I think each case we looked at individually, every group is scored against a matrix to see the extent of it. So I think the more evidence we've got of their offending across different crime types, the volumes, the values involved, means that they'll be treated more as a more serious organised crime group. But, two or three people could be a crime group. They don't necessarily have to be working directly together. They could be part of a chain. It just shows an organisation element to it. That's what we're looking at with an organised crime group. But certainly for us, it's that proliferation of gangs that move across different police force areas that target particular areas. Perhaps maybe they're moving away from other crime types. So maybe they feel that there's an easy chance to commit crime, potentially. Our shops are very much open to suit the purchaser, aren't they? It's all about the buying experience. And retailers are really keen to help support that. So obviously there's that kind of that challenge between the security versus that kind of buying experience for customers.
I always find that fascinating when offenders shift crime type. I think we saw that a lot with people who typically thought of themselves as car thieves, and then they migrated to other types of crime because they just found it too difficult to break into cars and steal them. So do you think that possibly is the case then? And that's why these organised groups are targeting retail. It's just a soft option for them.
Yeah, definitely. We call them kind of polycriminals. They're involved in many different types. And, we've looked at some organised crime groups and we've looked at their offending behaviour, and it covers a wide range of crime types. It's all about trying to, people either are feeding a habit, an addiction, they're feeding a family to their cost of living, or they're feeding a kind of a crime lifestyle. And to do that, they will often go out and diversify and look at covering different crime types.
And you mentioned in terms of, sort of data or sort of police awareness, do you feel that there is a full picture of what's happening, or have we got some quite big gaps in knowledge there?
It's always difficult to say. So earlier this year, the British Retail Consortium came out and talked a figure of around 8 million shop thefts. That was, a good educated estimation on their survey. Policing probably saw 5-10% of that figure. So that there is a real gap between that. And of course, it's, we're really encouraging businesses to report crime, because if we report crime, we have a better indication of what crime has taken place, where and by whom. That allows us that information, that intelligence, to then put the right responses in place, target those prolific offenders. So you have an offender, we might have him in our system for committing 5 crimes, he may have committed 50 or 60, but until we've got that data, it's difficult to know the true extent of their offending behaviour.
I mean, reporting is such a challenge, isn't it? You talk to, small businesses, they say, well, I literally can't leave the shop floor. I'm the only person working here to go and report a crime. You speak to some of the national retailers, they say, well, we report, nobody shows up. What's the point? We've just grown disheartened that there's going to be a response. And then yet you hear the police saying, keep reporting. We want to know sort of what's happening so we can join the dots, understand the bigger picture and deploy resources where it's needed. But where I hear that figure, 8 million thefts, surely that would just overwhelm the police if that was reported. So do you really want people to report everything, or is there a threshold that you'd be looking for?
I think, well, it's difficult, isn't it? I think we want to know the information. We need to understand what crimes have taken place. Clearly, the priority will be those crimes where there's a suspect, if there's a known suspect that we got a line of inquiry for, we can kind of progress it from that perspective. We're never going to be able to turn up to all those offences. And actually, businesses will often look and use a measure of police attendance as a measure of how seriously we take the offence. Yet, on many occasions, the offender's been and gone, the evidence is captured via CCTV. The police to turn up in that scenario, there's not really of much value. We can collect that data subsequently and make it more efficiently. We bring together that CCTV. We've developed technology to capture that CCTV and capture it electronically in the cloud and store it in the cloud, which means we can kind of collate those bits of evidence and deal with offenders all in one go. Just turning up and picking CCTV up or speaking to a member of staff just because they were on duty now, not necessarily even the time the crime took place, isn't necessarily the best use of resources.
Okay, and I think, I know in England and Wales, of course, I think everybody is very cognizant that the police are, under-resourced, overwhelmed at times. And of course, you operate with a threat, risk and harm model whereby, we've got knife crime, we've got drugs, weapons, violence, sexual violence. There is a plethora of issues that the police are having to deal with. And so perhaps quite rightly, sometimes theft, if it's low impact, isn't going to necessitate somebody attending. But in terms of that threat, risk and harm model, do you think that's being used appropriately where there are violent incidents that are happening in shops? Should stores expect somebody to turn up to those?
It does. It depends. So I think it's, a lot of the work that we do at the National Business Crime Centre is educating businesses. When they phone the police, make sure they say the right thing. Invariably, we tend to find that they will report the shop theft, and then subsequently they mention there was an assault that took place.
Sometimes there is a misunderstanding between crime types where something really is a robbery because there's a threat or actual use of violence, but it's being reported as a shop theft because essentially the individual has gone in to steal. And I think perhaps there is an education piece there around that because it immediately elevates the seriousness of that event.
Yeah, and we produce guidance on our website which sets out exactly what, if you phone the police, what you should be saying. We would like more retailers to use reporting crime online. We've got something called a single online home, which is the ability for retailers to report crime online so they can do it during their downtimes. It's not so busy. A really efficient way in terms of getting that crime recording that comes into policing, and we can put that evidence together.
Superintendent Patrick Holdaway there from the National Business Crime Centre. And it's such an important issue that he raises around the huge underreporting of crime in the retail sector. So just by example, in England and Wales last year, the police recorded 340,000 incidents of shop theft. In comparison, the British Retail Consortium, in their annual crime report, suggested that there were in excess of 8 million incidents of shop theft in the last year. And that figure actually, coincidentally, tallies with the last Home Office Commercial Victimisation Survey, which actually put an estimate on the number of incidents rather than prevalence. And that also suggested that there were around 8 million incidents of shop theft. I think to say that data is a problem is a bit of an understatement. And I do wonder the extent to which this is allowing organised criminal gangs to take advantage, because they can operate under the radar when the data isn't being collated, the reports aren't being made, and then nobody is able to join the dots on people who are operating across the country. There's 43 territorial police forces across England and Wales, so having oversight is really key. When we look to other countries, New Zealand has one national force, for example, so potentially it's much easier to identify and track known and prolific offenders. But then you look to somewhere like the USA, where, they have, 68,000 police forces, goodness knows how many, and each working to their own laws. That's going to present a problem. So speaking of which, why don't we hop over the pond and just try and understand some of that US perspective around organised retail crime? My next guest is Gus Downing.
I'm really excited. He's the publisher and editor of D&D Daily, which I think a lot of you will be very familiar with. It's the #1 retail LP digital news source, so it's a go-to place for loss prevention and asset protection professionals. He has more than 2 million readers a year, and covers all things retail loss prevention. He's an absolute expert in this field and is going to tell us what's been happening across the pond in terms of organised retail crime. So wow, I think we've got quite a lot to learn. So Gus, welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered. We're absolutely delighted to have you join us today. You were just telling me that you're in Ohio, Cleveland, and this at one point, or is currently, one of the most violent places. What's happening?
Well, the gun violence in America has spiraled and just almost, according to the most politicians, out of control across a number of parts of the country. And the federal government has assigned their Safe Neighborhoods program, where they will send in 20, 30, even more different agents from various agencies into a city to try to, gather up and take as many guns off the market as possible.
And are we seeing that playing out in some retail environments as well? Are the shops, are the stores becoming increasingly sites of violence?
Well, if we chart retail fatalities, we also chart organized retail crime and the robbery rates, and have been doing that since 2016. We produced a report that we send out. In the fatalities alone in retail, violent fatalities, has risen 86% since 2016. So it's
Wow,
been, the violence has come into the stores
Yeah.
almost in conjunction with the increase in organized retail crime.
So
It's almost a direct correlation.
when we're talking about retail fatalities, is that somebody external coming into the store, and is that a store associate, an employee that is losing their lives?
Well, it's all of the above. I mean, a vast majority is consumers, innocent consumers. And then the next group is associates, obviously. And those are the two groups that predominantly make up the fatalities, with a few loss prevention executives and a few policemen. And they're relatively smaller numbers. They make up probably 10 to 13% of that number. And we're looking at right now 694 fatalities in 2022. And these are publicly reported. This is all that appears in the media.
Yeah. So 694 individuals have been killed in a retail premises in 2022. But the causes of that might be varied. I guess there's a whole range of different scenarios in which these deaths have come about. But yet this figure sounds alarming, regardless of what the reasons are behind it.
Well, and the vast majority are during a crime. It's like, if not, 80%, 85% is as a result of a crime, which could be a robbery, and also organized retail crime. I mean, that happens quite often. So, which is one of the things that's driven the retailers to adopt a no hands, no touch, no stop policy, to where the associates are not allowed to stop shoplifting.
Yeah.
That's been something that's been very prevalent.
Yeah. And so typically businesses here will have something similar, a no challenge policy, no intervention policy, because people were getting hurt, and they were getting hurt badly when they tried to intervene with a shoplifter, or they just inadvertently got in the way, and then, either weapons are used, somebody's shoved, pushed, a whole range of different issues. But what some store associates now are saying is that there's the mental health consequences of that, because they're being told, right, you can't intervene. The offenders know they can't intervene, and they've become so much more brazen, to the point they're almost taunting them, saying, what are you going to do? Come and get me. Touch me, you're going to get the sack. And that also creates a different set of issues, doesn't it? Are you hearing similar things in the US, that store associates now just feel completely powerless to do anything?
Oh, absolutely. There's been a couple of cases recently where community members and community organizations have actually confronted some retailers about, why aren't you stopping them, our kids, from shoplifting? And there's some conflict there with some of these communities. Just a couple of cases recently, where there's a high school right next to the shopping center. The minute the high school they get out of school, all the kids, 15, 20, 30 of them, go in the store and shoplift. And it's one of the superstores. So the store really is not in a place to stop juveniles of that level, with that many of them. They really can't do that. It's just can be too violent, can be too, legally liable, the liability there and such. But, the communities come back to the stores and say, why don't you stop it?
What is organized retail crime in the US? How do you define it? Because I feel like that's the first piece of the jigsaw. So is there a shared working definition of what an organized retail crime group is? I can tell by your laugh, this is not a straightforward answer.
No, it's not. Because that has been the subject of debate for over 20 years.
Okay.
especially in the last 10. And I'm not the one to want to define it, quite frankly, because the folks that listen to this here in the States are going to absolutely have my head.
Oh, go on, Gus. Give us a definition.
But, if you look at it generically, where you have, more than two people, or, involved in theft from a store, that's organized retail crime.
Okay, so it's about the number of people. And so, okay, so you could have two people, you could have one person boosting and then one person as a fence, like shifting the goods. They're selling it on online marketplaces. That's organized.
Well, no, I'm talking about two people in the store.
Two people in the store. Okay.
I'm talking about two people in the store.
Mm-hmm.
They have, the definition in theory has not really gone to the online seller yet.
Okay, so it's the activity in the store. It
really hasn't gone there yet.
Right, okay. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because, we're seeing so much on ORC at the moment. Is this just a cyclical concern? Is this anything new? Or is it just being, now it's the ORC season again, we're going to get, interested in this? Or is it because of the advent of online and other ways of selling on and, global reach, etc., that actually, okay, we've already had organised retail crime for decades, but we've seen a real shift in the scale and volume and severity of how it's operating?
It's going to be a sad answer for you. And I'm going to read something here that just appeared in the newspaper, last week. Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin said, when you have a culture that you can violate the law, steal, burglarize, do whatever you want, and the feds and the state and everybody else will just sit around and watch, you've got a problem. And it goes way, way beyond organized retail crime. The HSI executive said organized retail theft groups have become emboldened, stealing in the daylight and shooting or assaulting customers and employees who stand in their way. Over the past year, countless videos of employees being assaulted, even killed by thieves at stores like Home Depot and Lululemon have gone viral. Well, I wanted to get back to one of your comments about, some of the stores that are closing down as a result of the increased crime and theft. And, this year we've seen probably, 20, 30 stores, and I'm talking about significant retailers that have closed stores specifically because of theft, crime, and violence, and their inability to provide a safe environment for the consumer and just as importantly, their associates, their employees, to where employees won't go to work in those stores because of the violence, because of the homelessness, because of the fentanyl epidemic and what that brings to that unit. The terrible thing about that is that you're leaving a community unserved. They don't have a close place to get their prescriptions. It's really creating a societal problem for those neighborhoods as well. So we're kind of reaching a little bit of a crossroads here.
Yeah.
With some of these urban locations.
Before we started recording, we were just commenting about the scale of the US, compared to England, compared to some other European countries. And I recently did a project called Fortress Stores for ECR. And as part of that, I visited stores across the States. And that, for me, was really enlightening because I could see that by closing one of these stores, you were creating food deserts. You can't get, people who literally cannot get fresh food at an affordable price within a reasonable distance, and charities emerging to bus people to the nearest hypermarket to be able to buy fresh fruit and vegetables. So these decisions to close stores, while we think of it around sort of crime and, security, and think, we can't operate safely, the impact that has on already disadvantaged communities is really quite alarming, isn't it? And so there's a political element to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it a moment ago, the fortress stores. I mean, we have them as well now, and they're popping up in urban locations. A couple, for example, in New York City, that have literally locked down virtually everything, including ice cream. I mean, and there's a lot of great security vendors out there that have the equipment that allows them to lock it all down, so to speak, and to make it a safer environment. Now, the issue is it's harder to shop there, and you then get a community response of negativity. They don't trust us. I can't get what I need. It takes too long. So it's almost a double-edged sword. But yet that store stays there, and the product is there.
And that was Gus Downing talking about the extremes of violence currently being experienced in the US, with some really shocking statistics there. And I'll post a link to the report that Gus mentioned. We'll also be joined by Gus again later on in the series, and he'll be talking to us about organised retail crime associations in the US and the partnership work that they're involved with alongside law enforcement. So thanks, Gus.
So I'm joined now by Corin Dennison. He's the Global Director for Profit Protection at Adidas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Difficult discussions, I think, are taking place globally. We're seeing all sorts of behaviours, lots of uptick in crime, violence. What's the story for Adidas? What types of things are you seeing in your stores?
I mean, I think generically, I'd agree. I think there's a trend. There seems to be a trend. I think that's often regional. So we're seeing a lot of noise from the US, maybe not seeing so much from APAC and GCA, Greater China area. I guess for me as a retailer, it depends where you place your stores and the type of retailing that you're into. I would say whilst we're monitoring trends, I wouldn't say we're particularly vulnerable to those stories that you hear. However, again, bulk thefts are increasing, and probably more of a coordinated or concerted effort to get more premium product is probably something we're aware of amongst our peer brands. And I think that's just indicative of what's happening in the world. Socioeconomic factors. COVID had a big effect, without a doubt. A lot of retailers took their foot off the brake when it came to controls, simply because there was no footfall there. They were trying to leverage anyone that came into the store. We had the whole health and safety element of, do I touch a security tag? Do I nail the product down, or do I make it more accessible? And retailers also found more what I call funky ways of trading. They opened up channels of risk, which previously they kept in a box. But then again, to stimulate that consumer behavior, they opened up things. For example, instant refund. They reduced return times, free delivery, free return. All of that kind of thing was kind of factored in there, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So there's quite a lot to unpick there. Let's start with these channels of risk then. So in terms of bulk theft, where are you seeing this happen? Is this in the physical spaces, or is this just much as likely to be seen online as well?
Great question. When you listen to a lot of retailers and you ask them what their shrink behavior, what their call it subversive behavior was like during COVID, many would have said, well, it dropped. Of course, many of our stores were closed. Those that were open, a bad actor in that environment would stick out more than before, because Foot traffic had fallen down to 10% of what it used to be. We had more associates on the shop floor, so the opportunity to steal was probably reduced. And the capability of a shoplifter was probably more challenging. So therefore, we went into the online space. And of course, what I often say, the difference, and this is where loss professionals need to kind of focus on, in the physical space, you can see the bad actor often, but you don't know anything about them. You can see them, you can describe them, you can watch their behavior, you can track them in and out of the store. In the online space, we know everything about the bad actor. What we just don't know is who they are and where they are. We know credit card details, we know bank details, we know address, we know your history, your profile. If we consolidate that data with other retailers, we know what you're doing in other spaces. So I think this is where now, in the new omni space, call it, where we're converging online, offline, Boris, BOPIS, buy online, return in store, buy online, pick up in store. All of these mechanisms ultimately have risk associated, and retailers previously would have stayed away from some of those spaces, but now to get that extra buck, to get that extra margin, are moving into those areas. And sometimes it has to be said without fully understanding what the risk may or may not be. How many average consumers need to buy 10 pairs of sneakers of the same size?
And then claim that they didn't arrive.
And then say they didn't arrive, or say they did send them back, but you've not received them back, but it's not my fault because it must be the carrier. So again, is that a fraudster? Is it an opportunist? Did it happen? Is it genuinely that your return or reverse logistics is poor? Your reconciliation isn't great, therefore, actually, yes, sorry, there's your money back. I think the challenge is, in a lot of these spaces, loss prevention has usually been focused, well, traditionally because of the evolution of retail, in the physical space. We've then moved to online, and then we've had to, LP professionals have had to educate themselves on, well, where does online risk? Because if I have a great payment risk team, there is no risk. And of course, now we're seeing, again, all these creative ways. So we're having to educate ourselves on, actually, did that bad actor move from the physical space to the online space? Is it a completely different bad actor group? Which is highly possible, because a lot of online fraud is based on good credit, certainly post-transactional fraud. If you can get through a payment risk gateway to make a purchase, it's highly likely the money is good. To have good money, you need good credit history, you need credentials, you need good addresses. So again, is this a more sophisticated bad actor, fraudster, unproductive consumer, call them whatever you want, versus a shoplifter who often you could say is an opportunist? I walk down the street one day, I see there's no security guard, I really want a pair of sneakers, I take my chance.
Yeah. And I think that the skill set sometimes required for online, or the level of imagination, sets apart those that would steal in store versus those that would commit fraudulent acts online. I think sometimes they're quite a different actor. I've not heard unproductive consumer before. That seems a very friendly way to describe some of these individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, depending on the retail organization you are, I mean, if you consider in a physical space, when we define a shoplifter, we have a very clear, if you ask probably any sales associate or any senior leader in a retail organization, what is a shoplifter? A shoplifter is a thief is a bad guy comes into your store, we should stop bad guys. We're very clear. In the online space, remember, we can't see the bad actor. We can only see their profile. I think there's a different perception, and there's almost a fear that, is this person really a bad actor? Have we got it wrong? And what would be the consequence of us taking action against that person?
Yeah.
So, for an example, is somebody who orders 10 pairs of sneakers and only buys one, are they a good consumer, an unproductive consumer, or a bad guy? Now, most people would say they're a consumer. and depending on how many times they order 10 pairs of sneakers and return 9, we've allowed it to happen. In fact, we've encouraged it to happen. So they're a good consumer. Versus a consumer that's made 3 claims of did not arrive, or I sent my box back and it didn't get to you. Now, are they a bad guy, or are they an unproductive consumer, or are they a good consumer that's just been very unlucky? So I think this state of unknown is affected some retailers are very clear. That's a bad guy, and until you prove to me you're not a bad guy, you're a bad guy. And a lot of retailers are really, really sensitive to turning away the one good customer out of the 99 customers who may be bad guys. And that may seem crazy to you. If you look, 1% of your purchasing consumer base is maybe fraudulent, but I'm still not going to act upon them until you show me definitively that they are a bad guy. And again, we're talking about consumer loyalty. We're talking about the impact. If I turn away a good customer, my reputational risk, what does that look like? Social media, forums. We've seen it played out many times before. So personally, I think terminology is really important. I think there are some very emotive words. Again, if I was to call somebody a thief, definition of theft is to appropriate with no intention to return and to permanently deprive, of course. But using the word thief as opposed to something else, does that actually make it a little bit easier to sell?
Definitely.
I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the semantics are really important. And I think we see that culturally as well around what the acceptance is in terms of challenging people. Have they got receipts? We see at self-service checkout a lot, the different approaches globally, dependent on what customers will accept, because there's that nervousness of implying that somebody's done something that perhaps they shouldn't have done. I'd like to just ask you a little bit about what you're seeing in Adidas stores at the moment. So the physical stores. Now, you mentioned a lot of noise in the US. What's happening there?
Well, I think in a lot of areas now we are seeing in the news and more generically some of these behaviours, whether it be bulk thefts. In the UK, we used to call it steaming, where a large group of people simply walk in, walk out, challenge whoever. We've seen retailers changing their policies on confrontation. I mean, that's been probably a position now for the last 5 years, where obviously for employee safety, we encourage employees to rely on the technology and, yes, record distance, safe distance. Where we have security, physical security there, then yes, there's an expectation that they would apprehend or at least try to. Violence against employees is one that's very sensitive. I mean, particularly in areas where a population could have access to firearms, but equally in areas where they don't and where knife crime is very high. So I think, again, is Adidas susceptible to what everyone else is experiencing? I wouldn't comment on that directly. What I would say is we are very strategic as to where we place our stores, more so than other retailers, but no different to what I would call mid-range kind of retailers. I mean, we're in apparel, we sell sneakers and T-shirts. That's what we're famous for. You probably find grocery and convenience far more susceptible to the behaviours that we probably don't experience.
And so just in terms of violence, is this a new thing? Is this a growing trend, or is it just in the spotlight at the moment? Are you seeing an increase in violent attacks?
I would say no. We're not seeing significant increases, and we have a very robust reporting. We have a huge commitment to our employee safety. And again, that could be because health and safety is, again, part of the remit of this role. So again, it's not just about loss. I mean, I've talked many times before on this. I think risk professionals have to be more rounded. If it's a single kind of ticket item that you're enrolled for, I mean, what happens when your shrink becomes optimal or negligible? Do you cease to exist? Is there a connection? I mean, again, before we would have said health and safety is all about, trips, slips and falls. that sits over there with this person. Oh, and retail risk and loss sits with this security person. Well, actually, health and safety is all about safety. It's not just about slips, trips and falls. So it's about the safety of the individual and the duty of care that a brand has for all of its employees and all of its consumers. But again, what I would say through networking and good collaboration with other brands, and some of the organizations out there that publish very good data, we do track what trending is and we do sense check ourselves. I think it's challenging. I think the challenge we have is to keep some context. And I'm not suggesting that media and others kind of overinflate the risk, because the risk is there and the numbers are seeming to stack up for themselves. And I think it's 98 billion in the US to orc behavior assessed. One thing I'm very clear to do, though, is if cost of living crisis and other factors have driven this apparent increase in crime and theft and loss, then how do we separate what I call the opportunist versus the prolific behavior?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of, who are your organised retail criminals and who are the opportunists. Do you have a definition that you work with in order to make that distinction?
We don't. I mean, we're aware again of the definition. So, I mean, the one I see for retail crime is very specific. In my opinion, 2 or more is maybe too low. Is that 2 opportunist shoplifters together? Is it 2 friends that have decided today I'm going to steal a Mars bar or a Snickers bar? And by that definition, they're an orc. So all of a sudden, then they're captured in the data, which could skew what you're looking at. I mean, if we're investigating orc behavior because it's 2 or more, and I've got 1,000 incidents where I believe 2 or more individuals, and that's not 2 or more people entered the store to steal, that's 2 or more people involved. So it could be someone waiting in a car, it could be somebody going in to spot the product and distract the associate, and then it could be the person that does the sweep. So that's the piece I would like to see more. I would like to see not defined better, or maybe it is. Maybe there's a better definition, but I'd like to kind of reduce all of the noise to look at where the core issue is, because otherwise I fear all that's going to happen is we're going to spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with everybody. And we are seeing this in online data. I mean, we did a project last year on this, and an end-to-end project where we actually managed to speak to some individuals who were online, unproductive consumers stroke bad actors, who we did civil recovery against, and then actually said, why did you choose us? What was your motivation?
Oh, fascinating. And what did you find out?
Well, what it was very clear was, when you break it down, is why would somebody steal? And often it's because if you're online and you see the opportunity on the chat room, then you give it a go. Is it too good to be true? No. Do I do it for $5,000 or do I do it for $100? Let's do it for $100. When someone comes knocking at your door or sends you a letter from a lawyer and says, hey, we're taking you to court, then if I'm a previous good character, I might have a mortgage, I might be 18, 19, going to college, whatever. All of a sudden, this shock and awe effect. And we were seeing that in people paying out. We were seeing people literally paying us back within days. And we asked, why? Why are you paying us back? And it was that very reason is again, the perception of the individual was, I'm not a criminal. You created a loophole, or you created an opportunity, and I took it. Now you're calling me out on it, and I don't want a criminal record, and I don't want law enforcement involved. Then here's your product back, or well, actually, here's your money back. We don't want the product back. It's it's aged product. So I think again, if you're a retailer with that kind of issue, being able to separate, okay, opportunists, how do we deal with opportunists? How do we deflect them, direct them, redirect them? And then how do we focus on prolifics? Because to be honest with you, the prolifics, I mean, how do you identify an orc? Is it a group that keep coming in every day and stealing one pair of sneakers? Or is it the group that comes in and takes 20? probably it's the group that takes 20. So I need to focus on that, but I can't, because I'm putting all my resources into these single opportunities that I've got to deal with. And not that they're not eroding my margins or my, contributing towards my shrink. And it's probably death by 1,000 cuts. There's 1,000 opportunists and there's 5 prolifics. So where do I start?
It's so challenging. Just going back to those definitions, because I think it is important that we all are talking about the same thing. We're hearing organised retail crime mentioned all over the world, and I worry that we're all talking about different things. So from one extreme being one person, but that they have multiple roles. So they will go in, they're organised in that they've got a system, they've got a technique that they use, they're consistently stealing, and then they're selling online through various marketplaces. So I think the emphasis there is on that they're organised and have different roles. And then you see other definitions where, as you say, it has to be more than 2 people, perhaps even more than that, and they have to travel. So they're not just targeting the same stores. So there's an element of organisation in that they know they can evade detection by moving between different cities or different states. And I think the reason the definition is important, because if we want to actually, get the attention of law enforcement, we need to know there's a level of severity. And I worry that we might clog up law enforcement's time with lower level prolific offenders, opportunists, as you say. And it's almost like the boy who cried wolf, that then law enforcement are like, these are not organised criminal gangs. They're not reaching that threshold that we would define them as. Is there a way forward, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great point. And again, I think law enforcement play a very critical role here, but I think you're right. I think it's right that law enforcement prioritise. Business crime is important, and we've heard it many times before that law enforcement don't take business crime seriously, and that's a global problem, not just a US or a Europe or a UK problem. And there's a finite amount of resource, and for sure, law enforcement and governments have been very clear on their priorities. Their priorities being safety of people, drugs, people trafficking, and there is a hierarchy of severity, and probably business crime, shoplifting is not up there. Or maybe it's changing. And police have the intelligence. They know all about the individual, and the retailer doesn't. So the police will have eyes on. They'll have eyes on previous convictions, arrest history, whatever. I think on the police definition of what organised crime is, not organised retail crime, but organised crime, there have been elements of defining, so for example, a cross-border criminal, or a county lines criminal in the UK or a state lines criminal in the US is probably promoting someone to a higher level of attention than somebody who stays within their own city or their own town. So to your point, I could be very prolific in my own community, but if I now start to cross state lines and move around, then, and in the US there's federal laws to combat that, and I think in Europe and UK now you're seeing that as well. So again, if intelligence is key, and the police have intelligence, and obviously disclosure of that information to non-police has certain implications, then what can retailers do? So can retailers consolidate data? Can retailers talk to each other? And we're seeing that more.
And that was a hugely insightful Corin, Dennison, and his good friends Boris and Boppis, who I had not come across before. So very interesting to talk to him and get that global perspective from Adidas. And that brings us to the end of episode 1 of Retail Crime Uncovered. Wow, I certainly feel like I've learned a huge amount from our 3 guests in relation to organised retail crime, or organised looting or bulk theft. Choose your description. I guess just in summary then, from some of the things that we've discussed, what are the key takeaways? I guess for me, it's still the issue around definitions. I think we need better descriptions, a typology, of offending behaviour so that we can really begin to speak the same language, join the dots on some of these organised criminals, and think about the most effective way of tackling them through legislation, through law enforcement, and through concerted partnership work of retailers coming together in consortiums to tackle these individuals. So I think there's certainly something there around definitions that is still yet unresolved. Reporting, of course, is such a major issue, and I absolutely sympathise with retailers and their employees when they say they don't have time to report, or they've given up because they just have lost confidence in law enforcement or the broader criminal justice system that isn't delivering to them their expectations. So that leaves me really to thank my guests. But as I started this podcast, unexpectedly, it began with a story of elephants. And I'm actually going to end on elephants as well. And that's the elephant in the room, or elephants in the room. There's definitely more than one. It's an absolutely packed room. But the one that I'm going to talk about is addiction. And so whether that's the fentanyl crisis in the USA, whether it's heroin and crack cocaine in the UK and other countries, drug addiction and substance misuse is absolutely a key driver to prolific and persistent theft from our shops and other acquisitive crimes such as burglary. And I want to know what's being done to tackle the root causes of crime when somebody is in the clutches of addiction that all they can think about is how to generate enough money to get their next fix. And let's face it, that money is then going to some of the most unsavoury characters in our society and lining their pockets. I don't see much sophistication in the criminal justice system in the way that these prolific offenders are being dealt with. The revolving door of prison, simply being sentenced to days or perhaps a few weeks in prison each time, but no time to actually spend on rehabilitation, on addressing the causes of their criminal behaviour. And again, that's things that we're going to pick up on future episodes. So thank you for listening.